Hello everyone. Today I'll be reading you the first of 10 stories of King Arthur. Uther and Igraine. It was a troubled time for the island of Britain. The Romans had left and the Celts battled viciously among themselves. Britain and her people were being destroyed. A warrior named Uther showed great bravery and skill in these wars, and he soon rose to become Pendragon, High King of all Britain. He knew that his first task must be to unite his kingdoms by getting the warring chieftains to join together under his leadership. Uther Pendragon could be hot-tempered and thoughtless, so he asked his most trusted adviser, Merlin, to help him. Merlin was a druid, a Celtic priest, and some said he could do magic. His wisdom, understanding, and gentle spirit would help Uther convince the chieftains to join with him and make peace, not war. One of the first people Uther and Merlin went to see was Gorla, the Lord of Cornwall, in his castle at Tintagel. Gorla was a good and reasonable man, and he soon agreed to accept Uther's leadership. When their talks were over, Gorla prepared a huge feast for Uther and his men. During the feast, Uther looked up and, across the table, saw the most beautiful woman he'd ever laid eyes on. "Who is that?" Uther asked Merlin. "That is Igraine, Gorla's wife," the old man answered. Uther said nothing, but Merlin saw Uther's eyes gleam just as they did when he was in battle. To Merlin, this could only signal trouble. Later in the evening, Uther spoke to Merlin again. "I'm in love with Igraine," he whispered. "I must have her for my wife." "She is married to Gorla," Merlin whispered harshly. "She cannot be yours." But even Merlin knew that it was no use. Once Uther's mind was made up, no one, not even Merlin the Druid, could change it. Uther left the castle that night, but at daybreak he laid siege to Gorla's castle in an attempt to steal his lands and his wife. In the midst of the fighting, Merlin found Uther on his steed, watching the battle from a rocky outcrop. "What makes you think," Merlin said slowly, "that Igraine will want to marry you after you have killed her husband?" "I think," replied Uther, smiling, "that she will not know he is dead." Merlin shook his wise old head. He knew exactly what Uther had in mind, and he knew how determined Uther was. "I will help you," sighed Merlin, "but only this once, and you must do something for me in return." "I will do whatever you ask," Uther promised. "At nightfall," said Merlin, "I will make you an enchantment that will turn you into Gorla. Igraine will welcome you as her husband." "And what must I do in return?" asked Uther. "Only this," Merlin replied. "When your son is born, you must give him to me." Uther turned pale. "You ask a high price for your magic, Merlin," he said. "Yes," said Merlin, "and you must swear to pay it." "I swear it," said Uther quietly. "I swear it as your High King." The battle raged on through the day, neither side gaining the upper hand. As the sun set, Gorla heard that Uther had retreated. "We must pursue him," he cried. He saddled his horse and rode with 20 of his men out into the darkness. On the outcrop, Merlin was beginning his enchantment. As he mumbled ancient Celtic spells, a mist began to creep in from the sea. It rose higher and higher like smoke from a dragon's nose. It encased Uther, and then, as Merlin thrust his staff into the soft patch of earth, it receded and left the two men standing on the outcrop. But it was no longer Uther who stood before Merlin. Anyone would have said it was Gorla. Anyone, that is, but Merlin. "Now," said Merlin, helping the new Gorla onto his horse, Ride." He slapped the horse on the flank, and it hurtled toward the castle. Within the castle walls, Morgana, the 3-year-old daughter of Gorla and Igraine, was crying. "My poor father is dead. My father is dead," she sobbed. "No, little one," Igraine crooned. "Your father is not dead." As Igraine stroked her daughter's hair, Gorla burst through the door. "See," smiled Igraine. "Here is your father now." "No!" Morgana cried at the man standing before her and her mother. "He is not my father. He is a bad man." Burying her head in her mother's skirts, she wailed again. "My father is dead. My father is dead." Somehow little Morgana saw something that Igraine could not. Igraine did not know who the man in front of her really was, nor did she know that the real Gorla, her true husband, lay dead less than a mile away, killed by Uther's men. Morgana knew, and she cried louder and more bitterly. But all Igraine felt as she sent the sobbing child out of the room was relief and happiness to see her husband alive. The next morning Merlin entered the castle at the head of a grim procession, carrying Gorla's body. Using all his powers and his gentle way with words, he managed to explain the events of the previous night to a tearful and distraught Igraine. Somehow he was able to calm and comfort her. Igraine and Uther were soon married, and Uther took Gorla's place at Tintagel. 9 months later, in the middle of a bleak British winter, Uther Pendragon's heir was born. Gazing adoringly at her tiny new son, Igraine rocked the baby tenderly. Suddenly Merlin burst through the door with Uther behind him. "Merlin, I beg you to reconsider," Uther cried. "You swore by your kingship," Merlin bellowed. He stormed over to Igraine, and displaying surprising strength for an old man, wrenched the baby from her arms. "No!" Igraine screamed. "My son!" She could not understand why Merlin had suddenly changed from a kind old man into a vicious thief. "Please, Merlin, my only son," begged Uther, trying to stand in the old man's way. "He does not even have a name yet." With the child still in his arms, Merlin whispered to Uther, "If only you could know what your son will mean to this country." Merlin kissed Uther on both cheeks, then spun around and left, his robes billowing out behind him. Igraine's screams seared through Uther, his whole body racked with guilt at the foolish promise he had made. Later that day, far from Tintagel, Merlin was singing a lullaby to the baby. "Hush, little one," he said when he had finished. "Hush, little Arthur, true King of Britain. You are going to Wales, where you will be safe, safe until it is time." Merlin brought the baby to Ector, a trusted warrior. "Guard him well," he told Ector, "for he is the one." Uther Pendragon remained High King of Britain for several years, but the guilt of losing his son and breaking his wife's heart was too much for him. He died a shattered man, and, as far as anyone knew, without an heir. Britain was without a leader once more. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day.